Greetings, comrades. I want to start today's episode with a little example that showcases what today's episode is going to be about. I've experimented with putting the explanation before this and after that and all this stuff, but in the recording, everything else sounded really silly. Don't worry, we'll get to the meaning of this, but I decided to give you a little picture of an introduction and then explain why it all actually matters. See, when Yegor Gaidar, at that point a promising 34-year-old economist that had just very recently joined Yeltsin's government, first visited the state treasury in late 1981 to check how much money the newly minted Russian country would actually have at their disposal, he expected to see a somewhat healthy balance. You know, maybe a couple of dusty Soviet gold bars tucked in a drawer somewhere, or, well, more likely, a reassuring spreadsheet in Times New Roman that said, something to the likes of, "Don't worry, comrade, we got this," except, well, in economist speak. Gorbachev, at that point, had fled. In a month, the Soviet Union would be dissolved, and there would be a lot of problems that needed solving, yes. But the USSR was an oil exporter. It had been huge and powerful. And sure, there had been disasters, and when Gorbachev, the filthy commie bastard, finally vacated the office, he definitely pocketed a decent amount of cash, but after all, it was the Soviet Union's money he would be inheriting, and it was just too much of it to be there. Gaidar, having just received his PhD in economy about a month earlier, was eager to put the funds to good use. He wanted to go down in history, and he really wanted to do much good to his country. Yegor Gaidar's father, Timur, had fought against the Americans in the Bay of Pigs invasion and even had made friends with Raul Castro himself. And now, at that point, Gaidar felt that he had the chance to do something even greater. The little chubby man had a lot of personal pride and the desire for glory, yes, but he also genuinely wanted the best for his country. After all, he had been agitating for free market reforms during the perestroika, and now, finally, the incompetent party apparatchiks had been pushed aside. Yeltsin, of course, could do the political stuff, but it would be him, Gaidar, who would be the one who would make sure that nobody in Russia would have to stand in long lines for deficit products like, 250 grams of boiled doctor's sausage. Doctor's sausage, which at that point in time had less to do with whatever was meant by it's made from poultry on its side packaging, and more had to do with whatever was at the time available for the people who made it. And despite that, it was seen as a luxury item and a deficit. But we'll get to these sausages in a different episode. Gaidar had checked the budget, and it was supposed to be manageable. On that November day, the ambitious Muscovite knew that he had some difficulties and tasks ahead of him, but he knew that this was his job to finally make the vast country's engine run properly. That he was the right man for this job that would really fix the economy. But on that cold November day in 1981, Gaidar's heart was colder than the weather in the Red Square. The state of the newly funded Russian state funds was abysmal, to the point that he could barely even understand what was going on. He had known about corruption and efficiency, but not to this extent. As the very first Minister of Economy of the Russian Federation, he would, indeed, go down in history, but not exactly in the way that he himself had expected. Shock therapy wasn't what he wanted to be known for, and neither was the harsh monetary reform or the default in rubles of 1998. Wikipedia, the main English language one, quotes James M. Boughton's book, where he presents a truly miserable state of affairs, quoting the situation thusly. Quote, Soviet Union bequeathed its successor state, the Russian Federation, with a growing pile of $66 billion in external debt and barely a few $1 billion in net gold and foreign exchange reserves. End quote. But even this pitiful amount for what was left over from the USSR was an imaginary number, an amount that was polished up a bit so as to not make Russia look as horrible to Westerners. The reality, as you can probably imagine, was much, much worse. As recalled by Boris Nemtsov, late Boris Nemtsov at this point, Igor Lipsitz, Andrei Nechayev, and multiple other economists and media workers who were around, including politicians as well, who were around Gaidar's circle back in those days. Well, because sadly, Mr. Gaidar himself also has passed away. He apparently was way too embarrassed to give out the real numbers to Western media, but even more so to his own countrymen. At that point, Russian currency reserves amounted to $26 million, with an external debt of $124 billion, and $20 billion plus interest had to be paid by early 1992. Yes, the country was in a state of complete economic collapse. The budget deficit exceeded 30%. In fact, you could barely even call it a state budget. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many former Soviet expenses fell on the still quite fragile shoulders of Russia, maintaining the army, borders, embassies, trade missions, and all international activities. However, the amount of income was vastly reduced, while the expenses increased. Yeah, in short, at that moment in time, Gaidar knew that he was fucked. Well, to be precise, Russia was mostly fucked itself, and Gaidar would be fucked in the future. Because although the glorious motherland being, well, screwed is the normal state of things, this time she had caught a metaphorical STD. The issue was Russia thought it was just, well, herpes as usual. But Gaidar was the one with the PhD in economy, so as the smarter of the two, he realized this was but something deeper and darker. Something terminal. So supercharged, irradiated, Chernobyl-style fiscal aids with metastasized corruption and a side of existential rot. Amazing. And yet, he still lied about all this stuff. To the people, and even to International Monetary Fund and everyone else. His reforms were quite successful, but that's about the lies and how people deal with this and how this impacts lives. See, I wanted to talk about some facts and events that various governments and corporations have politely brushed under the carpet, and how that's made some men very, very rich. No conspiracies here, just the little things that you have to research for that are hidden in important documents in small print, which, legally speaking, they aren't hiding, but that they're also trying to not to draw any attention to or make it easier to learn about. Because, yes, comrades, for the Russian economy, all of this has been the slow climb part of the roller coaster. And at this point in time, today, you have reached the 153-foot or 47-meter high point of the new Texas Giant in Arlington, 6 Flags Over Texas. And, well, imagine that this is your first time there, or on any roller coaster for that matter, and you're about to experience what a 79 degrees drop really feels like. Although I should probably use American mountains in this analogy, as that's how we call them in the post-Soviet countries. And I know that in some other places they call them Russian mountains. Unrelated to the main event of the episode and main subject matter, but the conspiracy-laden Russian TV channel TNT has made a documentary about how those American mountains, or Russian mountains as some other countries call them, but basically roller coasters, were built to worship Satan. Yeah, in a way, you'll also get in this whole season random facts about bizarre Russian conspiracies from now on in my episodes, as I look at all the trends and data, and the internet tells me that people actually like their stuff in their podcasts. Now for those facts and events that people are hiding and, well, that's making people very rich. I will use Russia as the main example, because, well, to be honest, even Navalny's team and Lipsitz and other Russian economists agree that Elon Musk is technically formally a bum when compared not only to Putin, but also to Rogozin, Chubais, Shechin, Miller. Miller is the CEO of Gazprom. And it's quite interesting that Forbes doesn't list the CEO of Gazprom super high on their important rich people's list, as they only count his yearly salary of $27 million. But, what exactly counts as someone's money? What counts as Putin's money? After all, well, there was a famous insult from Soviet-era political jokes. May you only live from your salary. And I feel like Forbes are insulting Mr. Miller, Putin, and other people here, and I don't intend to be as rude towards honest bratva. Not today and not on the future episodes. See, right and proper lawful thieves, as, would feel very offended by that posh magazine with the glanced pages, which, well, quite likely they can't even use this toilet paper in a pinch, especially if they're going to be in prison and, with the Parasha rules. But it's not just about Russia and the fact that they're hiding away from society. Although it is a major one, of course, but, then there's the French with how value-added tax was established, and also a bit with Estonians, which also ties into some other factors that I'm going to be talking about later. And, well, other things, whomever else I'll be able to recall from all this time of work, and especially how I've been doing only war episodes and missed out on a couple of other important stuff that I really should point out of things. I'm leaving the obvious targets out. Looking at you, London grad, I'm leaving these obvious targets out since they have been done to death already. Because, yes, this will end up with a bunch of crazy ways various Russian groups are embezzling amounts of personal wealth from the war in Ukraine, with some utterly stupid vatnik quotes. Because, well, I also have to talk about some European companies who use the fact that most people don't know much about FPV drones, so they literally make blood money by overcharging people who donate, and, well, they are sometimes not sending as much drones to Ukraine as they should. But, I also have to pretend that I realize that I have to at least pretend to hide from you the fact that sometimes I want to cover current news episodes, so I added a bunch of other cool stories in here too, so it should be fine. Besides, that means I can include some weird factoids and other stuff that will make you think about politics in a way that won't give you massive headaches, and again, allows me to make these episodes a bit more timeless, so to speak. Plus, I really need that watch time for my YouTube account. Because, for one, we also made our very first sort of experimental episode where I was taking around people around Riga, the parts where I live, on YouTube. I was horrible until I managed to stumble upon what's what by filming myself at the end. And, of course, this is also going to go on YouTube with the thumbnail and everything, and we really, really need the sort of the watch time. Because, I need my subscribers to be able to, sit through and watch the whole episode over there. Because, oh boy, that's a bit difficult. I have the subscribers to get this stuff monetized currently, much less than I would want to. But the first big point is that to even get to somewhat monetizable situation, well, I have these 836 hours of full-on watch time, and I need 3,000. So if you can, I would be very much happy if any of you would just look up the Eastern Border podcast or on YouTube, or just the Eastern Border there. I'm pretty sure there's nothing else there. And just, check out my stuff and please watch the videos in full, because I don't even know how long I'm going to get that part. But I'm going to upload stuff more in there as well. But one thing though about all this monetization, everything, is the stupid algorithm. I will throw that one in as well, because, oh boy, if you ever wanted to know why some massively popular creators have quit, I've got you covered, and why I'd rather be honest about what I'm doing here. Like I said in the discussion with John in the previous episode, I intend to ignore the algorithm completely and just do my own thing, because, well, I would really enjoy to just get monetized there and then worry less about this stuff, because so far, people are just going to Google my stuff up anyways if they're going to search for me on YouTube, so I don't have to worry about that much there, but I do have to get those listening hours. Oh yeah, and well, all of this is going to be a bit more experimental and me trying to make this stuff more entertaining for you. Well, at any rate, if you'll have anything to say about this episode or how we should structure them in the future, of course, please, just, let me know, and it's going to be great. Anyways, I'll grab something to drink and get on with this so that you understand better how all this went. The intro part was given out to my people on my Discord to, verify if this is cool or not, and not sure how that went, because after that I had to write all this out. And yes, this is fully scripted, unlike my regular episodes with the news. I really, gave it all, and this is 19 pages of fully scripted stuff, so I hope that, you will find this to your liking. But yeah, welcome to the Eastern Border. Let's get on with the show. The first thing that I want to talk about is actually not about economy, and is somewhat relevant to today's episode because I spoke about this with some, aesthetics and art philosophy people, and we spotted something very interesting about some certain trends that people try to analyze these days when it comes to this. Let me just first take you way back to the early 20th century. When Russia was in flames, early 20s, group of slightly unhinged and bold filmmakers decided that cinema wasn't just an art. It was a weapon in their civil war between communism and the whites and everything else happening when Bolsheviks came to power. And these guys, these new filmmakers of the Soviet Union, with the avant-garde spirits, they were not trying to entertain the masses, they were trying to rewrite their brains, build the new Soviet man. Among them was Sergei Eisenstein. I have mentioned him previously on the show. He was born in 1898 in what is now Riga, Latvia. Yes, my hometown. Eisenstein wasn't just a filmmaker, he was a theorist, kind of a cinematic mad scientist. His dad, by the way, built all the Art Nouveau, or Jugendstil as we call them, buildings in Riga, so he was born in those. But Sergei Eisenstein, he created the theory of montage. See, the concept that said that if you smash two unrelated images together, you can create an entirely new meaning. It wasn't about continuity. It was about colliding this stuff, just like in the sense of, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which permeates through Marxist works. And the thing is, in Battleship Potemkin, his 1926 masterpiece, the now iconic Odessa steps scene, that's just that. There are screaming mothers, soldiers, a baby, a carriage bouncing down the stairs like it's in a horror version of Chariots of Fire. All of these shots, they shock you, confront you, and basically forces you as the viewer to connect the dots. And I'm using, basically all this movie language because, sometimes I happen to read the newest papers by my good old art philosophy professor and then talk to her as well. So, around the same time, another movie maker, Lev Kuleshov, born in 1899, performed a cinematic experiment so legendary it now has become actually a textbook item for, movie operators and movie makers. The Kuleshov effect. He showed a blank-faced actor next to different images, a bowl of soup, a dead child, a woman. Audiences saw the actor looked hungry, sad, or affectionate, but it was the same face every time. The conclusion? The conclusion is that the human face will invent meaning out of chaos and give context to things. And then there is Giga Vertov, born David Kaufman in 1896, who directed Man with a Movie Camera, a 1929 documentary with no actors, no plot, and pretty much no mercy. He believed the camera, the eye of the cinema, kino eye, could reveal truths the human eye could not. He wanted people to film their lives endlessly, creating a new political awareness. In other words, he predicted, the selfie, just with way more progressive avant-garde socialism and fewer dog faces. And why am I talking about this? Well, because this was a really interesting document over there. Fast forward 100 years, really. A bit more, but you get the idea. Right now, we're not watching propaganda in black and white anymore. We're watching cats lip sync Cardi B in 4K, whomever Cardi B is, but that statement is straight from my art philosophy professor. But she noted that it's the same technique. Same technique, without no jokes, because today, even art is inspired by something, and there's no surprises here, because enter TikTok. Of course, it's a platform, a Chinese platform, which was launched by the Chinese tech giant ByteDance in 2016, and now it's valued over $275 billion. With more than 1.5 billion monthly active users, it's one of the most influential culture machines, if you can call whatever produces culture, on the planet. And apparently it runs entirely on the principles of montage this collision the Soviet kind. And would make sense as well, since, after all, well, Mao considered himself to be a true Leninist, and his Cultural Revolution and all these other ideas, well, they were somehow valid in there. They had their own version of all this mess. But now think about this. TikTok isn't about the narrative, it's about the edit. Every swipe is a new jump cut. 1 second you're watching a 17-year-old give life advice from the front seat of a parked car, and the next it's a conspiracy theory about pigeons being CIA drones. This isn't just chaos, it's engineered chaos. TikTok, and I quote here, is a hyperactive slot machine for your attention span. It's the Kuleshov effect with ADHD. You see a dance, then a war zone, then a cake being decorated with enough glitter to choke a toddler. You feel something, but you don't know what or why. But you keep watching because the algorithm over there knows. This, as my professor put it, is Eisenstein on steroids, with a business model. And let's talk about that business model. TikTok monetizes your data, your gaze, your various neuroses. The longer you watch, the more money they make. In 2024 alone, TikTok raked in over 20 billion in ad revenue. That's more than GDP of quite a bunch of countries, and most of it came from selling your attention span like it's Black Friday at a pawn shop. The Soviet avant-garde, from whom this is coming out, and I really cutting out at least some of this stuff, the Soviet avant-garde wanted to reprogram the masses to give them this new Soviet ideology. TikTok wants to sell the masses lip gloss and cryptocurrency. Oh, and fake gambling ads as well. Yeah, selling off whomever and whatever you want to your audiences there. Both of these things rely on the same thing, apparently, because it was a really, really interesting paper that I read. Fragmentation. In both of these cases, reality is broken into pieces and rearranged for effect. The only difference is, intent. The Soviets wanted a utopia, produce an utopia in people's minds and make this new Soviet man ready for it. TikTok just wants clicks, but, just sort of funny how they achieve this, because this is where it gets darkly funny. Sergei Eisenstein once believed that forcing viewers to interpret for themselves a barrage of images could trigger revolutionary consciousness. Now we're being forced to interpret a barrage of memes, trends, and thirst traps, and we call that Tuesday. Vertov imagined a society where people would film every part of their lives in the name of collective enlightenment. And we got there, but instead of enlightenment, we got 12-year-olds reviewing skincare products and middle-aged men dancing in parking lots to 90s remixes. There's even a term now, coined by authors Erdogan and Broll, called the TikTok economy of shared symbols. Meaning that it's not actually delivered to you, it is implied, remixed, and memified. Just like this montage of Eisenstein and other early Soviet avant-garde era, the message isn't in the image, it's in the juxtaposition of everything. And perhaps most disturbing of all, TikTok doesn't just use this montage technique of colliding things and posting them one after another. It literally is one. Your entire feed is one endless, algorithmically staged film. Every swipe is an Eisensteinian cut. And the viewer is the editor's dream, confused, addicted, and still watching. So where does this leave us here? What I want to tell you about this? Well, the Soviet avant-garde believed film could reshape how we see the world. And TikTok has proven they were right. Only now we're not building a better world, not building a Soviet man, not building something that would somehow bring progress to people. We're building content calendars. Our reality, well, if you watch TikTok that is curated by algorithms, structured by fragmentation, and driven by, whatever keeps people watching just a little longer. And that may be the most successful and most sinister use of Eisenstein's technology and propaganda cinema that you could possibly imagine. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people don't think about this way, but I also didn't. But when you think about this, TikTok dealt with this whole idea of propaganda and reinforcement that In the early days of the internet, we were somewhat, dealt with this issue, which is why, for example, television, and when you had fewer channels, why TV is better at propaganda and why TV is a passive thing instead of watching YouTube or searching something online. Why getting everything on one feed is bad for you? Because it lacks intentionality. And here I have to pull out some comments again from my professor of art philosophy in college. But if you think about it, if you go to YouTube or you look up a podcast, you have to at least look and click yourself and make some active choice about what are you looking, what are you watching there. But on TikTok, it's just like on TV, and why TV really made people dumber and why TikTok is now, because you were just a passive observer with no input in there, and your stereotypes got reinforced. And whereas Sergei Eisenstein at that point didn't even think about TV, it was all about movies, but they played a large role in soy propaganda. And then, sometimes you have to think about that these guys definitely knew these methods of how this stuff worked. And the brain rot of TikTok, yeah, a bit more intentional than you might have expected. And once again, I didn't expect to see this much of a nefarious narrative, but wow, this blatantly surprised me, because if sometimes influencers work and leave a bigger impact at people who watch TikTok than you might think, well, that's because they're literally pulled out from the geniuses of Soviet propaganda movie makers who forced them onto people. Every time you watch TikTok, you 100% are watching literal propaganda pictures. That's just one thing, though. Other thing that I promised at the intro parts of this show was the value-added tax. And I'm mentioning it here because, again, from political philosophy part, that also is a thing that people, tend to miss about this stuff. It's a bit different than sales tax, and, you'll understand why you should be informed about it. Because, again, all these are little stories that I researched and gathered and couldn't put into words otherwise, mixed together and with some news. So, let's talk about what VAT is. See, VAT, value-added tax, is a type of consumption tax. Unlike income tax, which punishes you for earning money, or capital gains tax, which punishes you for successfully investing, VAT punishes you for the unspeakable crime of buying things. In other words, if you consume something, you pay. The more you consume, the more you pay. Congratulations, you obviously end up funding the government one toothpaste tube at a time. Now, value-added tax has its roots in ancient regime history with all these other people, but modern VAT, I'll get to the modern VAT, otherwise this is going to be too great. It was intended as a beautifully elegant economic mechanism, first proposed in the 1920s by a German industrialist, Karl Friedrich von Siemens. Yes, that Siemens guy. The guys who now make MRI machines and sometimes lawsuits. But the value-added tax system only truly came to life in post-war France, which is why I'm going to throw some shade at the French, where bureaucrats were inventing new ways to tax people without calling it a tax. Maurice Lauré, John Director of the French Tax Authority, implemented value-added tax in 10th of April in 1954 in France's Ivory Coast colony. Then he assessed the experiment as successful, and France introduced it domestically in 1958, and since then, we have one of the most regressive and evil taxes out there, but sadly very necessary in a way. But you should at least be informed about this. And if you're only paying sales taxes, we'll get to that later as well. See, the key innovation of this value-added tax, it taxed value at every stage of production. See, when a tree becomes lumber, that's taxed. When the lumber becomes a table, that's taxed again. When the table is sold to someone who just wanted to eat their cereal like a normal person, that's taxed too. Each step adds value, and each step adds tax. It's like watching a financial parasite grow stronger with every economic interaction. By the time the product reaches the customer, it's passed through so many hands, each carefully greased by the state, that you're not buying a table, you're funding a fiscal relay race. Unlike sales tax, which hits you all at once at the end of the process, like a disappointing season finale, value-added tax is incremental. businesses pay value-added tax on what they buy, then charge value-added tax on what they sell. And they can then deduct what they've already paid, and the government gets its cut at every step. Basically, they just add the value-added. Value-added tax is basically tax on whatever you add in the value. Basically, if you buy trees and all this mess, it's a complicated system. But the idea is that every time you add value, you make something from something, you add value, and then it's this tax on this value added there. In theory, this creates transparency, fairness, and a stable revenue stream for governments because, let's be honest, as much as I mock them, they do need it for important things like building roads, running hospitals, and occasionally dropping $500 million on a software project that crashes on login, but that's the whole thing. And here's the kicker. Value-added tax was designed to be invisible. The end consumer bears the burden, but often doesn't notice it. It's the taxation's version of a slow-acting poison. Traceable, efficient, and incredibly effective. Now, the moral argument for value-added tax is that, for the income tax, it's the fact that government protects your income and all this mess. Social security tax is that government pays pensions. You can't just say governments really at least can't just ethically state that we just want to take more money from these people and then just spend it all on other stuff, especially in this here situation. The problem with value-added tax is that they assessed the experiment when they introduced this about how this stuff works because it's a huge mess, and then they gave the moral justification slightly later. Right now, it goes something like, it helps us control the consumption patterns so we can just lower value-added tax for things that we need. We want people to consume more and everything, but consumption controls are very stupid. Basically, in one of these cases, value-added tax is incredibly regressive, and I'll get to that a bit later. And secondly, it's one of those few cases where, the moral justification came way later than any actual reason for this tax. And if you can just at least in the political philosophy, you have to justify all the other taxes that you pay. But value-added tax, oh no. No. That doesn't work that way. They just introduced justification for it to sound moral, basically afterwards. So this is one of those cases where the government just takes your money, and worse yet, it takes most of this money from the lower classes. It's taxation's version of a slow-acting poison. See, technically, value-added tax works best in a world where businesses keep perfect books. There is no cheating. Governments are benevolent, and every game theory works as planned because everything is just excellent, and Gitkin's not in prison and war didn't start or something. In reality, value-added tax enforcement requires all these bureaucrats, auditors, tax consultants, and a small army of clerks who understand how to file Form 882 Schedule VAT A, Annex C, which somehow only exists in triplicate and must be printed using blood ink on a full moon or something. And evasion? Oh, evading this stuff is a sport. In some parts of the world, VAT fraud is so common it's basically an industry on its own. Fake invoices, shell companies, carousel fraud, and that stuff's real, by the way. And chains of imaginary transactions spinning like a demonic merry-go-round, except instead of children screaming and yelling, "Oh my God, make this stop!" it's accountants vomiting spreadsheets. Governments love value-added tax. It's reliable, doesn't require the political trauma of raising income taxes because most voters don't actually notice value-added tax creeping up 1% here or there. You don't try it in the streets over value-added tax increases. You just pay more for a coffee and wonder why your bank account feels haunted. And while corporations can reclaim value-added tax because if they buy something from another corporation, if they are once paying this whole stuff, they can just buy it without it. You, however, the lowly consumer, never get a refund. You're the end of the line. The economic sort of trash can out there. The person whose wallet is, plundered with clinical detachment and a smile. Value-added tax, in theory, is a model of fiscal engineering. Efficient, broad-based, hard to dodge. In practice, it's a toll booth on every road of commerce. An economic vampire that doesn't bite. You just wake up every day slightly more pale, and slightly more broke. So next time you buy a sandwich and see that mysterious 20% added on at the end, or in Latvia 22%, don't get angry. Just whisper French government really needed money back in the 50s and accept your small ongoing role in the great invisible machinery on the state. But here's why I want to mention value-added tax here, because it's often described as a neutral tax, which is a polite way of saying it hits everyone, whether you're buying caviar or cup noodles. It doesn't care if you're a billionaire buying a yacht or a single parent buying diapers, the rate is the same. In theory, that sounds fair. Everyone pays their share, one people, one tax, right? Well, not really. But here's the key. This is the kicker here. The less money you have in income, the more value-added tax hurts. If you earn minimum wage, nearly all your income goes to necessities: food, transportation, toothpaste that promises too much, fight in your teeth, all of it taxed. If you're wealthy enough, most of your spending is optional, and when you save or invest or do other things with your funds, guess what? These are not subject to value-added tax. The taxman only shows up when you dare to need things or goods and services. This is what the economists call a regressive tax. What society in general calls let them eat cake, except the cake has 20% value-added tax and a luxury bakery markup. And sure, some countries try to offset this by exempting food or children's clothing from VAT, but not even cancelling it. For example, Latvia just cuts it to 12%, but the rules are often so convoluted that even tax officials start twitching. Apparently, in the United Kingdom, chocolate-covered biscuits are taxed, but plain biscuits are not, because clearly glaze equals moral decay. Evil Anglo-Saxons, right? So while value-added tax might not care how rich you are, your wallet does, and that's how the most neutral tax system manages to be quietly brutal to the poor, while politely tapping all these rich people on the shoulder and whispering, "Whenever you're ready." That's the big issue why taxing the rich should be more important, because, look, I'll get the sales tax as well, but value-added tax is one of the reasons why progressive income tax also would be necessary, because otherwise, they can talk what they want, but this is the primary situation where you're literally paying more in your more percentage of your income in taxes because of this. If you're poor than if you're rich, which is just a bit crazy. And again, the moral reason of all this stuff is just because it's a behavioral control device now. A fiscal cattle prod for your moral compass. Governments discovered that if you tweak these value-added rates like knobs on a microwave, you can shape how people consume stuff on how they, mostly sin or starve. Want people stop smoking? Jack up the value-added tax on cigarettes. Or just put in customs duties, tax, or everything. Want people drink less soda? That to sugar and cold public health. Want people to buy fewer plastic bags, cars, fireworks, or anything else that could be considered fun. Extra value-added tax and everything. That's just pretty much crazy. This kind of taxation has a name, Pigovian tax, after economist Arthur Pigou, who once proposed that external costs should be taxed so people would behave like decent creatures. The modern implementation of that idea is, you want a bottle of Coke? That'll be 27% VAT because you didn't walk to a farmer's market instead. Logic is, again, simple. Make bad things expensive and people will do fewer of these bad or undesirable things. Well, what could possibly go wrong? Except that sometimes the tax hits the wrong target. In a couple of countries, tampons are taxed higher than Viagra because clearly one is a luxury and the other is basic need for middle-aged senators. Glorious. In effect, value-added tax becomes a kind of a moral pricing system decided by lobbyists, health ministers, and people who actually don't go to grocery stores themselves. Because, think about it, value-added tax basically means not what's bad and what should happen. Think about how this affects, again, like I said, most people who are paying most of this tax and who pay this all the time, they're the people with lower incomes, right? So now think about this. This is the people who are usually wealthy, trying to tell you through, economic incentives what's bad for you, because they know that they wouldn't care about all this magical tax, really. They just did crazy. And, of course, people can avoid this. If you need another reason why I personally despise this one tax, but let's just compare this because, again, Donald Trump recently spoke about this and he said it's some sort of a cheating stuff. Well, the only thing value-added tax cheats is... The only thing value-added tax really cheats out of us is our own money and the fact that our government tries to control things with it, which is better than an outright ban, but still. But here we must come on to the post-Soviet world. Because, well, the post-Soviet world is a land where the memory of rationed books still lingers in bureaucracy. Tends to be an Olympic event. After the fall of the USSR, many of our newly independent countries needed revenue, just like Russia did, and fast. Economies were imploding super fast in the 90s, and someone had to pay for all these potholes, pensions, and, whatever was left of the public trust. This is where we adopted value-added tax. It was somewhat perfect for the solution. Right now, we also use this to manage our own austerity. By the mid-1990s, almost every post-Soviet country adopted this as their preferred weapon of mass taxation. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Russia, all the rest. 1981 already. Gaidar did this itself. And, this whole thing really worked only at the moment where you could move on to some other situation, because if you did not... it did not work even properly until we really implemented the European Union stuff, because paying value-added tax in countries like we were, pre-joining the European Union, oh boy, that's a mess, because that was the one tax that everyone really wanted to avoid by fake companies. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the United States said, no thanks to value-added tax, and stuck with their own sales tax, which varies by state, city, and, sometimes local cult leader, I presume. In the United States, buying a sandwich involves consulting a flowchart. Is it hot? Was it sliced? Did you eat it standing up? If yes, sales tax applies. If no, well, somehow sacred and untaxed. Same with value-added tax. At least, value-added tax is brutal and consistent, and has to be shown on the packaging. That's the problem here because of sales tax differences. That's why when you go to the store in the United States, you come out without actually knowing how much you would pay by the cashier. It's just somewhat crazy. So that's the whole idea. In a lot of these countries here, despite value-added tax really working, sort of being more organized, it's still a game of who can pretend to be the best. Especially in Russia, which this is used to hilarious degree, with fake invoices, missing shipments, and enough shell companies to start a beach resort, because if you buy something by a company on a company, you can just save up a ton of money. Again, thank you to the French at this moment, but at least now you know what value-added tax is and how this functions. But here we come to the very first news segment about all these economical scammy things that I want to talk about first today. See, military volunteers who involved in providing assistance to the front lines in Russia currently, all these vatniks, they are more and more concerned that the biggest Russian automaker, AvtoVAZ, isn't really helping the common cause. See, according to the company president Maxim Sokolov, because I have to give you concrete examples as well, AvtoVAZ, this auto company, they'll cut salaries by at least 20% and switch employees to a 4-day work week starting in September. That is the biggest auto producer out there. They make the Lada cars. Yep. The company's management made this decision amid a sharp decline in demand for domestic cars and overcrowded warehouses. They can't even sell them through corruption, really. According to media reports, among them being RIA Novosti, many employees are considering resigning and are actively looking for new jobs. Gaz and Kamaz, two other biggest Russian car makers, are following AvtoVAZ's lead and switching to a 4-day week as well. In February 2025 alone, and I only have data about the February here, AvtoVAZ had accumulated about 100,000 unsold cars compared to a norm of 60,000, and it's been going on way worse than here. And here is what the vatniks have to say about this, because this all also involves this being a scam, although these guys really need it. See, Two Majors writes, Nivas and Larisas are very much needed in the front and in the rear, but the beauty of capitalism and effective management is that due to inefficiency of federal agencies, frontline soldiers, volunteers, rear units, and authorities are forced to turn to the people for help to ensure logistics. To be honest, it's complete madness. And, well, obviously, I have to agree here. Voyevoda Vishayet, or Voyevoda Reports, notes, against the backdrop of news about Vaz, Gaz, and Paz switching to a 4-day schedule, the Ministry of Defense, maybe it's time to centralize instead of this sort-it-out-yourselves approach. 7,000, send, at least 7,000 of these same Nivas and Buhankas, the cars that we need, somewhat centralized. That would cover the army's needs for a long time and support the factories for at the same time. And I'm not joking, I very often hear from people who come to meet me that these are, direct orders. Figure out yourselves, go right to the volunteers, and so on. Those are, orders by the people who order them stuff, really. My friend and I, the helicopter, explains all this scam which Avtovaz is doing and why, well, even when they wanted to, they can't really deliver stuff. Quote, in reality, all this mess with supplies to the army, the Russian army, is much more complicated, at least in aviation. Let's say that a squadron commander is justified to the regiment commander why his KA-52 squadron needs 3 Nivas. My neighbor from Mivoshem even justified why he needed a Gazelle. That's a bigger bus thing. The technical maintenance department justified this order, and even the guys from the HR department justified a 7 for themselves to transport business travelers, documents, personal files, medals to the front line, whatever. The regiment commander takes this list to his own commander, who's higher up, and eventually they go to Avtovaz. The money was allocated by the Ministry of Defense, even black number plates were issued, the cars were practically registered. Value-added tax was already counted in all this stuff, but then all sorts of interesting other bots start to crop up. Who would drive them legally? A pilot? Flight engineer? Technician? Mechanic? Maybe the commander should drive them himself. But on what grounds? There are no permanent driver positions in the squadron. They can fly and maintain a helicopter, but not a car, and the squadron doesn't even have any cars. In addition, there are issues with refueling, repairs, and God forbid, decommissioning of equipment. After all, if the Ministry of Defense provided the vehicle, they will ask who is responsible for its loss. And who will that be? Well, many questions. And until these issues are resolved at the highest level, nothing is gonna come from this whole idea. This comes from my friend and I, the helicopter. And I mentioned all this mess currently because, well, it's tied into this whole idea of value-added tax. If you remember, in the whole post-Soviet sphere, that is taxing the vast majority of the population, taxing based on the end product. When army buys stuff from these Avtovaz people, they also pay this value-added tax, and currently, Russia needs that stuff a lot. Sure, they have certain deals how to buy it without this value-added tax, but remember, at the end, the consumer pays the value-added tax, and it's accumulated and reimbursed to producers after all this lengthy process. And just imagine how much would this be added to a car, which needs all sorts of various details, whose creation process is long, and the added value, when you build the car together, is massive. Yeah, and they're sitting there unbought because no one has the money to buy them. Yeah, value-added tax is something that I truly hate, but it truly forms a major part of everything that's going on in the Russian budget. They can't really, borrow money anywhere, basically, unless it's maybe, from China, but it's highly unlikely. However, all these goods that are sitting there, that is this value-added tax, and that is also sitting on not just Russia's, not just their underpaying other taxes from their income and from their assets and from everything, but if this tax, which forms a large majority of tax income in general, on everything really, if this value-added tax isn't paid, well then, Russia has even less money to organize anything and pay for these state orders. They would have somehow ordered something out there and got some of this tax paid, because this is, when things like cars sit in out there, it's not just sales tax that's lost. Value-added tax, like I said, is so much more. And the fact that they're just sitting there and rotting, well, once people stop paying it by buying goods and services, there's less money involved, and then as everything in Russia currently, well, mostly is associated with the defense sector, well, that's why salaries are going down and even less value-added tax is being paid. This whole thing ties together and shows that, they're not in a nice little position, and why they're not selling them for cheaper, just giving them away for the army. Well, they're not stupid. They don't want to go completely bankrupt themselves. But that's just one way how this value-added tax, which, by the way, really, you should understand better if you didn't already, ties into all this other mess. Here's something that I want to throw in to my Estonian friends, because, well, Kaja Kallas and other people from Estonia are noticed as among the largest people who are the most Russophobic, the most pro-Ukrainian. However, there is a little thing that people don't realize about Estonians and about their own issues that they're having, and I want to talk about this little part as well. After all, yet another little fact that they'd rather put away, just smear away and pretend it doesn't exist. See, once upon a time in this land of vodka, bears, ballet, and bravely poisoned dissidents, a miracle was promised to these people of Russia. Electronic voting. Yes, no more paper ballots, no more Soviet-era school gyms, no more grandmothers being bussed in to vote for the same guy they've voted for since 2000 for a pack of macaroni. No, comrades, this was to be the dawn of a new era of transparency, efficiency, and high-speed internet rigging. And the thing is that it was really enforced by Echo Moskvy, the sanctioned opposition run in Russia. That was meant to basically be the sort of like Solovyev, but for intelligentsia, and the very editor-in-chief, Benediktov. Yeah, he endorsed this and said everything was fair and nice and was the sort of standing in for this stuff. This is one of his brainchilds, but not him. Several Kremlin-friendly officials see Russia's remote electronic voting system, REV. Well, it first made headlines in 2020 when it was introduced for the constitutional amendments. That, surprise, allowed Vladimir Putin to remain in power until the end of time, or the sun, whichever collapses first, or, well, until the regime collapses itself. The system was promoted by Moscow city government with heavy involvement from Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor who acts like he runs a startup but governs like he's rebooting the KGB, and again, heavily endorsed by Echo of Moscow, the liberal media organization, which is now closed, by the same city, really. At the national level, Ella Pamfilova, chairwoman of the Central Election Commission and a former human rights activist, gave the whole thing a democratic seal of approval, even though no one can remember the last time she approved anything not printed on Kremlin's official papers. The pitch was simple: modern, fast, and COVID-safe, because nothing says your health matters like, all this election fraud stuff while the hospitals ran out of oxygen. Now, here's the kicker why this whole thing was even possible, because this allowed to extend the voting from 1 day to 3 days and basically made any actual observation of the elections impossible and, well, just made fraud so much more easier. And at the very last moment in these municipal elections, and even then when it was just checked and tested, because municipal elections in Moscow, that was the test, this whole stuff on national level, that was this whole constitutional amendment. It was tested in Moscow, and in Moscow municipalities, Navalny's smart voting. And this stuff was just, I'll get to this stuff, because all this mess was just stupidly abused, and Estonians should feel a bit bad about this, and why when everyone screams that their electronic system is so good, yeah, this is what can be done with it. See, here's the kicker. The technology behind Russia's e-voting system was licensed from Western tech companies, including the very same source code from Estonia's e-residency voting infrastructure. Yep, a model that apparently works pretty well in a country with functioning institutions and, zero oligarchs. But still, it's not like they didn't know this would be used to even further Putin's power and legitimacy, right? The Estonians sold their source code and sold this technology to Kremlin, making fraud much, much more easier. And, I wonder if the Estonian guys didn't actually expect this, because this is something that's that's on them. Russians reverse engineered the software, added their own, blockchain, as they called it. Really, nobody knows what's happening in there, and partnered with Rostelecom, a state telecom provider that moonlights as a surveillance machine, giving out in their own ads the fact that only FSB will know about your messages. All this magical stuff happening over there. And the final product, well, digital voting system that's technically online, legally opaque, and logistically unauditable at all with every observer ever. Perfect for a country where, elections are basically a ritual. It's, like I said, from the religious aspect, if it's a religious ritual, then this is a nice little electronic addition to this stuff. And how it actually worked? Well, now we go back to the 2021. During the 2021 Duma elections, electronic voting, that's State Duma, was piloted in several regions, mostly famously in, Moscow, where previously it had a quick run in some departments for municipal deputies. Exit polls and initial in-person vote counts showed strong results for opposition candidates, especially those backed by Alexei Navalny's smart voting strategy. But then came the digital vote dump. With the timing that can only be described as farcical, really. Millions of online ballots were counted late at night, just adding them in like this, flipping results in key races. It was just a disappearing act on democracy over there, not like it had been there before. But to candidates who were ahead by 1,000 votes already lost, suddenly, all of a sudden. Screenshots disappeared and transparency evaporated like a Novichok's victim's pulse. The official explanation? A delay in aggregating blockchain data. Translation, we were busy doctoring results, please stand by and don't ask so many silly questions. Even loyalist candidates looked awkward about their last-minute wins, like they shown up to a funeral in like a stolen tuxedo, really. And then there's the true genius of it. Unlike this traditional ballot stuffing that was filmed and all this stuff and looked messy, electronic fraud really left no fingerprints. Just an error message struck from Central Election Commission and a polite request to stop asking questions their windows are open there. And, this Estonian invention that they sold off to Kremlin very easily, really, has become one of their favorite things. Why do they love it so much? Well, you see, because it scales. Manual fraud is labor-intensive. You need work, you need volunteers, boxes, and you need babushkas, and you need to give physical stuff to everyone, and giving out like 5 kilos of macaroni to grandmas, driving them around. Who needs this? And it looks like awful. But with electronic voting, one server room in a ministry basement can handle the disenfranchisement of an entire nation with ease. It is literally fraud as a service. Plug it in, hit execute, and watch 80%, 86% approval ratings roll in like it's 2004 and people still believe in state media. More importantly, it lets the Putin's regime simulate democratic legitimacy for foreign observers, or at least pretend that it's doing this, while actually locking in its permanent authoritarianism, which then allowed Putin to focus on more, moral good stuff. Just like we in the West are doing with the value-added tax, which is my least favorite tax. Putin can just do basically outright. And, well, obviously, Russia's going to expand it further with everything because it's just stupid and unavoidable and just guarantees 100% election fraud in every possible cases. And, of course, they say it's just secure, just like their banking systems and the bridges and the people who accidentally say wrong things out there on Telegram and then get put into prison. See, Russia's electronic voting system is what happens when some greedy people from Estonia who invent this stuff and get shown all over the place about their successful achievements in electronic voting systems. Yeah, this is what happens when you mix this Silicon Valley branding, Soviet-era paranoia, and a government that treats opposition parties like seasonal viruses. It really digitized the whole coup. So, next time someone actually tries to tell you that this hardcore technology with everything, with NFTs and some such things like this is the future of fair elections, yeah, you can tell that to Navalny, because, again, well, if it looked good in Estonia, yeah, it stopped really looking fun when Russians bought it and Estonians knew what they were selling and didn't look so nice, which is one of the reasons why, for example, we won't be able to vote electronically for a long, long while, because this is just massive abuse. But now I have to take a bit of a break here because, again, we still have more pages because, again, fully scripted show. But first of all, I'd like to, again, say thank you to all of you supporting the show on Patreon, on Fourth Wall, or even on Substack. And if you want to help the show grow and consider it worthy, please consider supporting us on either of these sites. Patreon is patreon.com/the Eastern Border. Substack is, well, the Eastern Border, literally everywhere, all at once. And Fourth Wall, well, that's also our merch store, and you can go there via our homepage, theeasternborder.lv, where you can just, click the pinned post and see all the nice goodies out there. Or you can just message me on Blue Sky or on Discord or on Substack or whatever if you want to help us out somehow, and I will be very happy to explain everything to you, give you a link to our Discord channels, and show you how, everything's done. And because I'm super, super thankful for all your aid here. I wouldn't be here without you at all. This show exists only because of you, dear listeners. And I'm trying to make it better and bigger and with higher quality. Which means there's going to be a bit less episodes, which again means that, hey, if you thought we were getting a bit boring with the previous stuff, maybe I hope, maybe now you would have rethought after all of our July episodes and all this mess and how Ozzy's Death basically gave us all a soft reboot. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's supporting us, and well, back onto the show. There are some other interesting things that I still need to tell you about. Oh yeah, and I'll be leaving Miller and Putin's big wealth and how it compares to Elon Musk, another episode, and some other stuff as well. Because this time is going to be quite crazy, because we're already quite far ahead in time limit, and I don't want to make every episode, to be 2 hours long after all. So that's a bit crazy here. So I'm just gonna put this stuff in, and if I don't, remind me again. You can just send me all the emails here. See, another thing that adds an extra difficulty with all this economical mess and the stuff that people just don't notice with frauds and other ways how you also get sometimes abused in a way, and if you don't understand this, can be easier abused. But at least in your countries, it's just more like, putting these things away and not doing everything, basically intentionally bad. They just try to not make you worry about all this mess. Meanwhile, in Russia, there's a bit of a different situation. CZ channels are, once again, unsuccessfully trying to draw attention to a fundamental problem that, okay, everyone's lying. The military leadership hears nothing but lies and makes decisions based on incorrect information. And, that doesn't help with all the economy problems going on here. See, Battalion East wrote, quote, "There is a so-called expert community, and there is a very strong military expert community that soberly assesses our current situation and persistently develop concepts for the future of our army. Recently, in private chats among real military analysts, there was growing outrage over the product put out by public analysts. They are openly accused of treason, with systematic disinformation considered one of its manifestations. The reason, according to the military, is simple. There are dopamine addicts and there are dopamine drug dealers. The trouble is that dopamine addiction has spread not only in amateur circles, but has also penetrated the professional environment. Add an extra zero, remove an extra zero. It's a simple operation, but in the long run, it will bring not just problems, but tragic disasters. That is why military personnel who think and care about our country consider this information to be a form of treason." That's Battalion East. And a philologist in ambush adds, in addition to this topic, quote, "I understand when fake good news is deliberate propaganda, but when it's passed up to the chain of command in the form of reports, it ultimately leads to a grossly distorted view of the real picture, and accordingly to wrong strategic decisions. And then these lies spread like poison everywhere. The same goes for weapons development, assessing their effectiveness, and years later, all combat experience will be analyzed through the prism of these lies. It's just the same old story, and the same underlying causes, vanity and ego. The same decision to start the special military operation was made precisely on the basis of an overestimation of our capabilities. But this has taught us nothing, and our enemy plays on this weakness of ours time and time again. P.S. I emphasize, the problem of misinformation among the top military and political leadership has, in principle, long since gone beyond the realm of propaganda and information warfare. In particular, for example, such official statements form the basis for the assessment by the top military and political leadership of the effectiveness of our military machine and the potential of the enemy. That's a philologist in ambush. And I have to agree here, because, once again, I'm telling you all these weird ways how, not only Russia lies, but how governments try not to tell things. But at least your governments know what they're not telling. But over here, well, here's a system that tries to hide stuff from itself, first and foremost, which is just causing even more problems, including with the previously mentioned value-added tax. And, of course, they're successful when it comes to official propaganda, and, well, Chinese are even more functional there as well, since these guys invented TikTok. And TikTok is probably gonna change some weird minds and everything and create more propaganda than needed. But, well, we have to expect this mess somehow. And it's better when I really, to sort of counter position all this stuff based on how Sergei Eisenstein made his propaganda videos. I want to counter position this willful ignorance and this whole economical situation with the fact that you don't notice yourselves. And now I've also illustrated what actually happens if you miss on these important things and if you trust just whatever open reports tell you without any deep analysis. See, you need to be smarter than the Russians, and you need to learn something about all this situation by yourself. Otherwise, well, what's the point? You have to understand how, if you can be messed up by the things that you don't know, how messed up everything is inside Russia with Putin, the stuff that, well, he really doesn't know. And here's what it has led to throughout all these lies and all this system to their own people and their own commanders and all this corrupt system up to this point, illustrated by our friend Maxim Kalashnikov. Quote. This is, by the way, from the 31st of July. Quote. The deterioration of Russia's strategic position is evident. Well, we took Chasov Yar, turned it into dead ruins and fought for it for a year. The enemy, that is the Ukrainians, traded part of the territory for our blood and another ruined city of Novorossiya for the humanitarian catastrophe of the residents of Chasik. At the same time, Russia has become an area or hybrid cyber warfare. The enemy roams freely. And yet, not long ago, the enemy feared similar hybrid operations by Russia and NATO countries supporting Kiev. But the opposite has happened. Why? Well, even 2 months after the spiderweb, our leaders left the SBU and the GUR, the organizers of hybrid divisional operations, intact. Such impotence prompted them to continue their entertainment program in the form of cyber-pauchina. Powerlessness always provokes the aggressor to further attacks. And what about the fall of Chasov Yar and supposedly, he writes without supposedly, but I don't think it's going to happen because they overblown it themselves, the imminent fall of Pokrovsk. I highly doubt Pokrovsk is going to fall. It's probably not. But still, Kalashnikov adds, behind these places lies terrain where any advance would result in huge losses. It's a paradise for Ukrainian drones. And talking about drones, because again, I'm going to have to skip a bunch of stuff that I put in here, because otherwise I don't want, again, every episode to be 2 hours long. And I will mention the drone stuff later on, especially when it comes to FPV drones. Because once again, a lot of people on the web, especially academia from the West, and a bunch of analytics as well, they lack the idea of how they actually function and how much they cost, which causes them to make faulty premises and presumptions. However, I wanted to put this on this episode, but then I figured, you know what, that would make actually good stuff to be put on YouTube. So I contacted Latvian FPV drone makers, the ones who also run these, fiber optic drones and such. And I'm going to hope to make a custom episode on that one with more stuff on YouTube. Because, well, why not? That seems like a better idea than to waste all your time on today's episode and then just making it even more longer. But at least I hope that I have informed you about why it's sometimes necessary to read things in small print, and how all the systemical stuff has caused a lot of issues for the Russian government and the whole war effort. But one last thing that I want to put in today is about the YouTube algorithm, to give you a bit of an explanation there and what it's doing. I might as well just start this whole stuff as well. Welcome to the Eastern Border. Apparently, here we also dive deep into the cursed corners of the internet, so you don't have to. And this segment about YouTube is brought to you by existential dread, metrics that don't make sense, and whatever is left of our collective sanity after I try to understand how all this mess works. Yes, I promised you this YouTube stuff, and, well, I'd rather you actually listen to the whole episode, or even better, watch it all on YouTube, because that's the only part of this whole idiocy that you care about. But another final thing that I think that you should be informed about before judging other people on this. Of course, we have to talk about the algorithm. The unholy intelligence, if it could be named that way, that controls it. The kingmaker, destroyer of dreams, pulling the strings behind people's favorite thumbnails. Yeah. All this mess. Now, before you decide to skip until the end and thinking, rant about YouTube, let me assure you this is not just about this one platform. This is about what happens when human beings turn themselves into content machines, and when creativity meets pure ass capitalism, and when you decide to focus everything on top of it, and why I've decided to go full gonzo and make more artsy episodes, which are scripted and more fun, and maybe more swearing, but at least actual value added, which now you too understand better. This whole stuff is basically when you let a soulless math equation decide whether you're successful or forgotten. So, being a YouTuber is a creative thing. I skipped it because of all the mess, but now I'm trying to do this stuff back. And that's a brave choice. People who start doing this stuff, or even making podcasts, but podcasts are different because, again, there is no such algorithm there. You're brave of ideas, ambition, maybe a little caffeine-induced confidence, and you fire up your camera, do stuff with your first video, like just I did there, and Robert fed it that you upload it in crickets. No one watches it. But you don't give up. You learn the algorithm, you study it like it's an ancient text about how thou shalt not post on weekends, and, your thumbnail must be like awe-inducing. You read about CTR, watch time retention, design titles that feel like clickbait confessionals. And, well, that's the whole idea. In YouTube, you can watch everything second by second, and they see where everything drops up. You can go deep into this mathematics. Deeply and crazy. Because this is just stupid. But even if you go through all of this stuff, eventually it sort of works. One video pops up, you get subs, get monetized, you start saying things like, don't forget to like and subscribe, without actually vomiting in your mouth like I do when I have to say this. And at that point, if you're a creator there, then you have won the algorithm's temporary affection. But here's the thing about this evil algorithm. It's not your wife. It's not even a sugar daddy. It's more like a digital squid that grabs onto you, squeezes out your best ideas, and tosses you. And then, well, being a zombie and a Dracula mix as well. I don't want to mention vampire squids because those are actually really nice. But basically, it just sucks creativity out of you and makes you hate yourself. And then it just tosses your empty husk back into the void. Over there, yeah. I try to do the same for mainstream media, but as far as I understand this and how I've spoken with people who follow this stuff, yeah, at one point they don't create for joy anymore. They create for pure performance because they sort of have to. Which is why smaller channels actually do stuff not based on this algorithm, who put in real content. Those are the ones that you should subscribe to, because they are also, well, going to be most consistent, because they're not going to go and they're not going to go crazy. The algorithm that YouTube creates is, well, not like, what do I want to make today? It's what will the algorithm tolerate today? And then obviously at one point, well, at one point it always happens. Your views will drop, audience will disappear, and then your dashboard analytics will just do horrible things there, because there's going to be click-through rate down. Click-through rate is that you only get shown videos once you click on them, and then it's like messy because it doesn't send everything to every subscriber and all this mess. And yeah, they do all this weird mess with the algorithm changing the rules and you don't even understand why. So a lot of people just panic, upload more, experiment, pivot, start filming thumbnail faces where people look surprised, do crazier stuff and everything. They have to focus on doing crazier next big thing. Really successful creators stop sleeping, drink more, and check their stats like it's pulse. And of course they all burn out eventually. Not from lack of success, but from having to succeed constantly under the rules that change mid-game enforced by algorithms that can't really even be understood, really. Here's a kicker, by the way, about why a lot of your YouTubers quit and what this whole thing means. See, YouTube algorithm doesn't focus on your growth. It compares every episode that you make with every other episode that you've ever made, and with it showing basically every second where people dropped off. That's why they all have these various themes and everything, and why they have to do everything the same way and start the show the same way, because then they know they'll get the view through, and the view through is important because I need 3,000 hours of that stuff being watched before everything happens. And like everyone, and you can only get the outliers, stuff that people have clicked on, liked on, and somehow showed off from the standard normal deviation to be recommended to random people. Everywhere else, well, if I post a video, it gets shown to like a smaller group of subscribers and then it expands. It's such a long mess, and basically the YouTube algorithm, if you would follow it, which is why I actually, won't, and why I just want to monetize this stuff, and Roberts can argue about this. See, YouTube algorithm forces you to succeed constantly. People quit not because they failed, but because they, can't keep winning. Success becomes a prison because, again, you're compared to every other episode you've ever made. And I've studied this quite a lot. All this mess is the fact that you can create some sort of viral stuff. You can, create a hit series about Victorian hair etiquette or commentary on Gordon Ramsay screaming at soup. But your viral hit, you're expected to replicate that. And forever. Otherwise, it won't get recommended, you won't get the views. And views are everything in YouTube. Which is why a lot of these channels actually have sold out to private equity. Which is why I feel sort of bad about this mess. At least I know John hasn't, and that's good. But a lot of your favorite channels, you should probably look them up. And if you try to pivot from this shit, if you want to make something different, well, over here in my podcast, you guys know me and you're sticking around, but YouTube is a bit younger audience, and more fickle one. Like, don't get me wrong, people my age and older, they stick around and there's always this loyal base, but we're talking about, massive reliance on these sponsorships and everything, and how all this mess is weirder. And then, if you're making content, especially for, 13-year-olds where you're just relying completely on ads, you can lose all your loyal subscribers. And they just won't get shown your videos and everything. See, YouTube doesn't want variety, doesn't want deep informational stuff. It wants predictable dopamine. It wants content that can be binged watched in between existential crises and whatever you've ordered online from Amazon or from Uber Eats or Volt or Bolt, whatever. It doesn't care that you're tired, that you're uninspired, that you want to grow, do something else. Because, the algorithm isn't watching your videos. People are, but the algorithm decides if they even see them. And so creators leave. A lot of them, you must have seen a lot of videos titled like, why I'm done, this is the end, not clickbait, or the classic, I need to talk. Others go silently, their channels left behind like digital mausoleums. Still monetized, still playing some ads, still making YouTube money from old uploads, while the creators themselves have let the theater be a real-world jobs where the only algorithm is their boss smooth and makes some drama stuff going on. The algorithm keeps, meanwhile YouTube keeps rolling, the algorithm keeps recommending, and all this mess, and viewers just move on, and it's just quite sad, because the tricks it uses, like, it shows which videos are outliers and shows... I understand how the mindfuckery works, and I've spoken with people who follow it religiously, and I am not doing any of this nonsense. And I understood that I was doing the same thing with mainstream media, why I did this soft reboot and why I tried to restart the format, why am I doing this? And especially since I wanted to get onto this YouTube part. And over here, Over here, currently on YouTube, we live in a world where this AI algorithm, which changes at random and forces you to use terms like unalive and all this mess, where AI decides who gets heard, and every creator out there, not just, if you're putting on YouTube, you're still gambling your mental health for visibility. Quality is optional, output is mandatory, otherwise it doesn't matter how good your stuff is. Substack and podcasting, they focus on quality. YouTube is where I'm putting these longer episodes so that you guys can find me and can play me on your background or something if you're not into podcast apps, because it really depends country by country apparently. Or just you can put this on the background and where I want to put on some videos as well as a bonus or some additional stuff, because it's more for less in-depth videos for broader audiences and some heavier stuff. But YouTube doesn't care about the quality stuff. They care about, it's called output. And I'm trying to get at least stuff monetized there, because with everything happening to me starting September, yeah, not going to be easy, since after all, Evita's quitting her job and doing her master's, and weaker dollar, the stronger euro also makes me not feel that well. So I'd be very happy if you just go there and just play all my playlist on like background somewhere, so that I would get the viewing hours or something. You can even turn off the sound, but that's a thing that I really need. But all this mess is the fact that, well, there's still excellent dark comedy of all of it, just as in the beginning with value-added tax and with Gaidar's very nice ideas. Because remember, I used Gaidar and his whole idea situation in the beginning. See, YouTube and, podcasts, to me, they appeared about the same time, and now they're overlapping and serve different niches. All this new media sold us the dream of creative freedom, and, podcasts are still there, and which is why I tried to reboot all this mess, because making my podcast algorithmic would be even worse than just, standard YouTube cycles. But YouTube algorithm apparently gave us content purgatory. But hey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Am I right? Shit, I hate this mess, which is why I'm going to be trying to make some actual better content. So, remember, comrades, pay attention to these little details, because what you don't know can and will be used against you. Don't feed the algorithm. Algorithm doesn't care if you're happy. Algorithm cares if you're consuming too much content and clicking away at the right moment. What really matters is, as usual, happiness is mandatory. And, if you are to feed the algorithm, make sure it eats at least something worth noticing.